Hey, everybody. Okay, so I'm Betsy. Hi, nice to meet you. I should start by saying a couple of things. One, when I teach the Bible, I get really hype, like really hype. And so I don't wear shoes because it keeps me calm. Okay, so no judgment. I need it for myself. Also, you should know too that I'm a teacher. It's who I am. And so there are going to be moments where I ask you questions and I actually want you to answer. So whether that be through calling out or raising your hand is fine. Also, because I get so hyped when I teach the Bible and may have a little bit of ADHD, I can be a little space cadet-y. So if you are ever like, wait a second, something's not clicking, raise your hand, because I love when people ask questions in the middle because it gets really fun that way. So definitely do that, okay? Cool. Okay, so what I have heard from everybody is that your guys' theme for the year is restoration, right? And let's just start with something basic, which is, let's see how tall I can reach. So when you think of restoring something, what kind of items do you think of restoring? Or what ideas or images come to mind when you hear the word restore? Furniture, right? For all ladies, we're like, get that piece of cheap furniture, Facebook Marketplace, that's right. We restore furniture. What else? What'd you say? Homes, yeah, we restore homes. Cars, yep, we restore things, right? And see, there's this thing about restoration, which is that the goal of restoration is to bring something back to its former glory, right? In some way, it might look a little bit different than it did in the beginning, but the goal is to bring back that shine and that pristine and that polish that was originally there, right? Now, that's all very nice. It's nice to restore furniture and cars and homes and all those things, but I don't think when you guys made the topic restoration that your goal was to restore cars and homes and furniture, right? Your goal was more so restoring hearts, restoring minds, restoring souls, restoring emotions, energy, all these other things, right? And so here's the thing about the Bible is that it's really hard to take one topic and narrow it down to one story, and so we have to go back a little bit. Because when we're talking about restoring humanity, it starts in a very specific place. Does anybody know where that might be? Take a guess. The garden, right? It's always the garden. Every story comes back to the garden. That's right. So here we are in the Garden of Eden, right? And in the Garden of Eden, there is no sin. People are in perfect communion with God, right? They're in perfect communion with God, and they don't have to worry, right? And I actually think that worry is a main thing that keeps us from the garden in a lot of ways, right? So just imagine Genesis 1. This whiteboard is going to be or chalkboard is going to be all over the place. Just so you guys know, my friend Whitney always tells me to plan my board. Never remember to do it. So Genesis 1, here we are in the garden, and we know that we have communion with God. So we're with God, right? And not only that, but in Genesis 2, I'm going to narrow this down just for speed's sake, but basically, I think that Genesis 1 is about showing you who God is, right? In Genesis 1, God creates, he reigns over that creation, and then he rests, right? That's the pattern that God follows. Genesis 2, I actually think is a zoom into day 6, because then what we see is Adam doing the same thing that God did. So in Genesis 2, Gen 2, we as people create, reign over creation, and rest. These are primary goals for us to be restored to. Does that make sense? Cool. So here's the thing about reigning is in Genesis 3, does anybody know the way we were told to reign? What were we supposed to have dominion over? What was it? Yeah, the animals, right? We were told to give dominion over the animals. That was the way we were supposed to reign in Genesis 2. And then there was a creature, and actually specifically, Genesis tells us to reign over all the creeping things. And then in Genesis 3, what happens? The serpent, right? The serpent comes. And there's this phrase that you'll hear over and over again in the Bible that says, and they did what was right in their own eyes, right? So Adam and Eve are there at the tree. Eve's talking with the serpent. The serpent's telling her things. She's talking back. And all of a sudden she looks at this tree and it says, and because it was a delight to the eyes and was said it could make one wise, she chose to reach out and take this fruit. Two things happened here. One, She did what was right. So the whole story of the Bible is people choosing to do what is right in their own eyes, right? People do, I'll just say right, in their eyes. This board's gonna be crazy. Okay, so people do what's right in their own eyes. So that happens in the garden. And the other thing that happens is she chooses not to have dominion over the creeping thing, right? She was specifically given that charge. She chooses not to do it. So these are the two things that happen. So not dominion. So after Genesis 3, we know that God comes down, and I cannot even tangent into Genesis 3 because it's too cool all on its own, so I can't get that deep into it. But what we need to know about Genesis 3 is that with Genesis 3, God comes, he tells Adam and Eve, these are the changes that are coming your way, and then he makes them clothing, which I say is like him basically packing them a lunchbox, and he sends them out of the garden. And I feel like everybody has this image of God in Genesis 3, like kicking Adam and Eve out of the garden. But the thing is that it's not quite like that. Because if you look at the very next chapter in Genesis 4, Adam and Eve are out of the garden, so are Cain and Abel, their sons. And where is God? He's with them, right? God is actually outside of the garden with Adam and Eve, right? And so Adam and Eve are sent into this place that's considered a wilderness. Outside of the garden is a technical wilderness, and God goes with them to the wilderness. This is all going to tie back to restoration, by the way. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the wilderness and the antidote that God gives us for the wilderness. Because that weariness that we feel, that tiredness, that honestly, it kind of feels like maybe God just doesn't have your back, When you start to feel that way, you are in a wilderness, right? You are in this place where you are no longer feeling like you're with God, right? And when you don't have this God who has your back, which he does, but when you don't notice his presence, something's disconnected. So we have to figure out how to get back there. That's the goal. We're going to talk about the wilderness and the antidote for that wilderness feeling, okay? All right, so let me begin. Make sure not to miss anything. Okay, just talking about the wilderness. When you guys hear the word wilderness, I'm personally picturing a desert, because I feel like that's what people, actually biblically, it's the desert, so let's go there. What do you imagine when you picture a desert? Sand, okay, so sand usually says no trees, no plants, nothing looks friendly about a cactus, right? So it's harsh, right? It's a harsh environment, so we have harshness. What else about the desert? Empty, right? It's lacking resources. Okay, so no resources. Resources. There's one more thing that I think about the desert, which I guess it doesn't have to be this way, but it sort of feels this way. And the other image that comes to my mind is oftentimes I imagine being alone in the desert. It feels like it's just me. So there's this sense of loneliness. Yeah, and here's the thing, is that none of that sounds great, right? All of it seems kind of painful. But here's the thing, is that God in the Bible actually uses the wilderness as a painful but great place. And so I would encourage you not to hate the wilderness. And actually, I'll say this too, God has recently been showing me that I am currently in a wilderness place in my own life. And in showing me that I am in this wilderness, he is exposing different things that I hadn't known before. I fought the wilderness. I'm like, I'm not in the wilderness. I want to keep it away from me. 3 weeks ago, I was like, oh, this is a wilderness. That's why I feel this way, right? So you're not alone. You're just not alone in that. And the things that I'm learning about the wilderness is that God is using it for multiple things. In the Bible, God uses the wilderness as a place of revelation. See, this is why I got to plan my whiteboard, but I don't, So God uses it as a place of revelation, spiritual formation, oops, that's fun, testing, and solitude. So God uses the wilderness for all those purposes in the Bible. And so that's why I think that we shouldn't hate it when we're there. And what God is recently teaching me is instead of hating the wilderness and fighting the wilderness the way that we do, why don't we lean in and just be like, oh, what do you have for me here? What is the spiritual formation that you're sending me through, right? Because here's the thing. I don't know about you guys, but I know for myself, I love to provide for myself. I can work, I can find resources. My friends make fun of me for how ridiculous I am actually about gathering resources. I will find a way to make this happen the way that I'm thinking it will happen. I'm a little crazy about it actually. And so when God removes these resources, I believe that he's intending that you find him as the resource instead. And that's what God's been showing me over this last year. So, okay. Before we get into the story, we're going to be talking about the Israelites in the wilderness, because that seems appropriate. But a couple of things that happened before that I think we should mention. And already my whiteboard's all over the place, so what do I do here? So, okay, well, we're going to go over here. So in the wilderness so far, first we need to know that the Israelites have been enslaved for 400 years. That's not a great place to start, right? This is starting from the book of Exodus. God, when he is taking them out of Egypt, so we get the whole 10 plagues. A lot of you guys might know this story, but basically God sends Moses. Moses talks to Pharaoh. He says, hey, let my people go, a bunch. And then every time Pharaoh's like, no way. And so all these plagues come to Pharaoh and to Egypt. And then eventually Pharaoh relents and he says, okay, you can go. It's a tragic way that it happens, but he says, okay, you guys can go. So the Israelites are on their way out of Egypt. Something funny that I was reading in the text is the Israelites ask the Egyptians, like, hey, can I take this gold? Can I take this silver? Yeah, oh, okay, I'll take it with me. And then they pack it in their cloaks. I just thought it was funny that they were enslaved, right? So they were like, do you mind if I just, yeah, okay. And then it says, and the Israelites plundered Egypt. And I'm like, I don't know, they kind of asked. So I don't know. Anyway, so there they are. They're leaving Egypt. And obviously, these people have been enslaved for 400 years. And here's something to think about. When you have been enslaved so long, none of these people know what freedom even feels like, right? So in the same way, we as people living in this world that's filled with sin, that's filled with corruption, filled with evil, we do not know what the garden feels like, truly, right? But God made us for this garden. And so what do we do? Since we have this kind of enslaved mindset, what do we do about it? How do we find God in the midst of it? So hear this. So they've been enslaved. They're free to the wilderness. And God intentionally, this is interesting, when they're leaving Egypt, there's this easier road, there's this easier path to get up to Canaan through Philistia, so it's right on the coast. But God says, no, I'm not going to take them this easy route. Instead, I'm going to take them into the wilderness because it says, lest the people see war and return to Egypt. So God is safeguarding, knowing that these people have been enslaved for 400 years. He is safeguarding them from fear and anxiety. This will actually be too much for them right now, right? And so he stops that. So he says, no, we're going to go a different route. We're going to lead them into the wilderness. Then after God leads them into the wilderness, the Egyptians change their minds. They're like, wait a second, we just let all of our slaves go. Who's going to do all this labor, but they're already on their way. And so the Egyptians come with their chariots and everything, and they start following after the Israelites. This is all going to make sense, I promise. In Exodus 14, it says, when Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Okay, what does this have to do with you? First, the Israelites were so comfortable being enslaved that they would have rather been enslaved than to have felt the wilderness. And I think that that's something that happens to us. And what does it mean to be enslaved? In my mind, it is to be ruled over by a created thing. For the Israelites, it was the Egyptians, another created thing. For Adam and Eve, it was the serpent, right? And for us, It's all kinds of things. Money can rule over us, houses can rule over us, relationships can rule over us, work can rule over us. All these things can rule over us in a way that God never intended them to. So this idea of getting back to restoration is this idea of being with God in the garden. And the real question is how? How do we do that? Wouldn't you believe it? In the wilderness, God brings a cure for it. He brings a cure for the wilderness, for this idea of enslavement, and that is the Sabbath. The very first time Israel ever experiences the Sabbath is in the wilderness, outside of the enslavement of Egypt. Have you ever thought about that? When I was looking through this, I was like, well, where did the practice of Sabbath really begin in the Bible? And we see God resting on the seventh day. We never have another weekly account of the Sabbath happening in Genesis. So either it happened very early and it was just so commonplace they didn't mention it, or the fall happened really quickly. So one of those two things happened. But we basically have that one account. And then through the rest of Genesis, no mention of keeping the Sabbath day holy. You guys probably don't know this, but the book of Genesis, scholars think takes place over a span of about 2,000 to 2,500 years. This is a lot of time for no Sabbath. And throughout Genesis, you see people get worse and worse and worse and worse. And it gets pretty dark, actually. And then they're enslaved for 400 years. So add another 400 years onto the no Sabbath thing. And now, finally, they're in the desert. And God's going to call them to Sabbath here. Oh, and I should also say that right after they say, why wouldn't you just let us stay in Egypt? At least we were comfortable there, right? It feels comfortable almost to be enslaved. It feels comfortable to be ruled over by all of these created things because it's what we're used to. That's how our mind has been formed. And so God says to Moses, and Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. Okay. Exodus, so this is where your guys' packets begin. This is Exodus 15:22. Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea. Oh, and they go through the Red Sea. Obviously, they get safely through the Red Sea. They're on the other side. Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marva, they could not drink of the water of Marva because it was bitter. Therefore, it was named Mara. It's a lot of Mara, right? So here's the thing, is when the Bible wants you to pay attention, it repeats itself, because in the ancient context, they didn't have underlines or bolds or highlights or anything. They couldn't say, hey, I want you to pay attention right here. So it just repeats itself over and over and over again. So if you ever get to, one sentence or a paragraph and you just keep hearing this word repeated, the Bible wants you to notice something. And here's the thing, the word Mara in Hebrew means bitter. So it says, basically, they came to this place, and the water was bitter, and the people grumbled against Moses. Think about this. They were in Egypt. I'm already going to have to erase things because I don't plan ahead. So here they were. They were in Egypt. Imagine this is Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. They're on the other side, maybe 3 days. It literally says 3 days, actually. Imagine this. They went from being enslaved for 400 years, 3 days after finding freedom, they're bitter. They're grumbling, right? And that is because sometimes it is more comfortable to be enslaved than to be free. Listen to this. So they come to this place and they're bitter. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? And he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. That's cool, right? Okay, so here they are 3 days out, they're grumbling, and then God shows up. I'm just gonna put God so that you know he shows up after those 3 days. He does something, right? Because keep in mind, these people, maybe they feel far from God, maybe they don't even know how to see them. So God starts showing them little things. Here you go, here you go, here you go. He's gonna step in occasionally. So then, this is the end of verse 25. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule and there he tested them. So that tells us what kind of wilderness we're in, right? This is one of testing. Oftentimes a wilderness of testing is a place for spiritual formation. That is the kind of wilderness I am in, my friends, and it is not pleasant. So, okay, there he tested them, saying, if you diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God and do which is right in his eyes, right, the opposite of what Adam and Eve did in Genesis 3, do what is right in his eyes, not in your own eyes, and give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord, your healer. He's saying, my goal is for you to be whole and healed. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. Okay, so we're 3 days in, they grumbled, they're sad, and God says, listen, I'm going to turn this bitter water sweet. So he already did that. And then he actually shows up again, because guess what? These people are new. They're new to the story in a lot of ways. They're suddenly freed from enslavement, but at least they knew where they were, right? God's brought them to this place that they don't know, and he shows up again with some palm trees. And what's palm trees in the desert? That's a great palm tree, isn't it? I'm doing my best, guys. What's a palm tree in the desert? It's an oasis, and it's covering what? It's shade, right? So it's shade, and there's water there. So we know that God gives them rest here in the desert. But the story continues. So after a while, they sent out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness in Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. So what that's telling us is this is 45 days later, okay? 15th day of the second month, 45 days later, and here we are, okay? So he brings them back into the wilderness. He's like, you've seen my shade, you've seen my protection, I have covered you, right? So, after they departed the land of Egypt, and the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the people of Israel said to them, would that we have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out in the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. What are we seeing? This idea of being comfortable with being enslaved again. So here they are 45 days out in the wilderness. It doesn't matter that they've been freed for 45 days. What they see is that I'm not comfortable anymore. And oftentimes, friends, this place of the wilderness, this place of spiritual formation is not comfortable, and it's not made to be comfortable, right? Because God's trying to get you to refocus and reorient. It is a time of growing. Okay, so would that we have died. Yeah, this gets a little dramatic. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So that's a little dark. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. So God says, I'm going to send them food. They won't be hungry in the wilderness. So this is food, and God is showing up. God's showing up through food. And he says, they need to do this in the way that I tell them to do it. And here's the thing. Recently, this has been so strange. God has been teaching me to not walk in my own wisdom, even in my job, which is like a crazy thing. So besides my podcast, I'm also a realtor. As a realtor, there are moments where in this last year where I sought wisdom of others and I sought my own wisdom. I was like, okay, what's the best way to handle this situation? Because a lot of crazy stuff happens in real estate. And I went seeking counsel, right? In the counsel of many, victory is sure. You know, I'm going on that biblical principle. And it was funny because all the advice I was getting was actually against the thing I thought the Lord was telling me to do, but this was wise in my own eyes. Right? And I chose to do this, and actually everything kind of fell apart after that. But I actually think God was trying to teach me, do not do what is wise in your own eyes. Bring everything under God and let his wisdom be the thing that's walking you through something. So he says, I'm going to test the people, we'll see what they do. I'm going to skip past 5 through 12. Basically, what you need to know about 5 through 12, just for the sake of time, is that in this passage, God says, I will send them food, bread from heaven every day, and quail at night. So they'll have bread in the morning, meat at night. So days 1 through 6, they can grab an omer. It's a measurement, it's like 2 liters or 2 quarts or something. And so they can grab this omer for themselves. And when they grab it, take only enough for that day. Don't do anything more than the Lord has told them to do. And on the 6th day, he says, I will send extra so that on the 7th day you can rest. Think about this. Israel has been enslaved for 400 years. And the first thing God wants to do in the desert with them is bring them back to the 7th day of rest. Think about how significant that is. And also think about how many Christians do you know that actually do the Sabbath? I personally never saw it as a command myself. I know that it's in the 10 Commandments, but I never took it as a command. And this wasn't my plan, but I'm actually going to tell you guys a little bit of the story just because I feel like I'm supposed to, so I'm going to. Long story short, last year I got super, super sick. My appendix ruptured, and I mistook it for period cramps, and because it felt the same. And then, ladies, you rock. So felt bad, but I just kind of kept going, kept doing my thing. So 2 weeks later, after not realizing that my appendix had ruptured, I went into septic shock while I was at a musical at TPAC, so it was great. Anyway, I went into septic shock, literally almost died in the process, had multiple other health issues after that. And what happened was I had been told by God, I was working too much, and I wasn't really connected to my body. And I had been told by God the whole year before, do the Sabbath. And I kept praying about the Sabbath. And I was like, Lord, help me learn how to Sabbath. I kept praying that he would teach me how to Sabbath, And then maybe 6 months or so before I got sick, in 1 week, I had 5 people say to me this phrase. One of them was a stranger at the grocery store. I was standing behind her in line. I was working on my phone. I was texting somebody a message. And she turned around to me. I have no idea who this woman was. And she said, do you know that the Lord commands the Sabbath? 5 people said that to me in 1 week, and I know that when God wants your attention, he repeats himself, right? And so I was like, oh, yeah, I do know that. But I could never make it work. And I actually think it's because I was so far away from rest that I didn't know how. I actually didn't remember how to do it. That's how far away I was, right? That's how far away I was from the garden. And how can we know that we have a good God that is actually there for us, fighting for us, if we can't even let ourselves rest for even a moment, right? And so this whole last year was God teaching me how to rest by forcing me to rest. He was kinder than that in the desert, actually. So getting back to the story, God says, don't worry about the 7th day. You'll rest on the 7th day. I will bring you 2 sections of food for the 6th day. So this is verse 13. In the evening, quail came and covered up the camp, and in the morning, dew lay all around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as the frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, it is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each of you, as much as he can eat. You shall each take an omer, again, that's a measurement, 2 quarts or 2 liters, according to the number of the persons that each of you has in his tent. And the people of Israel did so. They gathered, I love this part, they gathered some more, some less, but when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Here's what's so funny, right? The moment God sends food, people start craving their resources, right? They're like, oh, I'm gonna get whatever I need. And then God was like, no. The people who gathered too much, you're going to end up with 2 omers. The people who were too generous, oh no, let's just make sure everybody else has enough to eat. I don't want to take too much. The people who took too little, God made sure they had 2 omers. So everybody ends up with the same amount of food. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat, and Moses said to them, let no one leave any of it over until morning. But they did not listen to Moses. So if Moses says, don't leave anything over till morning, and then people don't listen, why are they not listening? Fear, right? They're afraid that they're going to run out. They are in a desert, people. They're like, no, I need these resources for myself. I need them. And so they're like, I'm not letting this go. And that's so human, right? We're not hating on people. That's a very human response. So some left part of it till morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them, and morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted away. So basically God made it so they would get what they needed, and then they would have to learn to let it go, right? And that's the thing about the wilderness is, this is another thing I've been thinking about a lot. In this wilderness season, I feel like this year has been a wilderness for me. And in this wilderness, there are so many wants. that I've had. I would be much more comfortable if I had this, or if I had that, if I had more resources, if I had more finances, if I had all these different things. I would be so much more comfortable. But sometimes comfort can enslave us, right? God's goal is not my comfort. God's goal is for me to be free. And in order to be free, he had to show me what he was capable of. Here's another story. So throughout this year, this is so wild too. I had just applied for health insurance before I got sick, and I'd applied 2 weeks before. It was supposed to start July 1st. I got sick June 16th. Because I got sick June 16th, everything counted as a pre-existing condition. Nothing was covered by the insurance, right? That's tough. I had never been in debt. I was so proud that I had never been in debt. And actually, I would say that being in debt was a Nineveh to me. I never wanted to be near debt, you know? And so I had always been like very tight about providing for myself, making sure I'm responsible. I was very adult. And also, when I started real estate, I told God that I would always tithe with any commission I made from real estate. I promised him I would always tithe. So here's what happened. After I got sick, I got so many bills. Because you don't just get the hospital bill. You get all the third-party people, and you're like, where are you guys coming from? I thought you guys were all at the same place. They're like, no, we're all these different things. And so it's like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, you know. And I applied for charity from the hospital because I was self-pay. The original bill, just from the hospital alone, not from any of the third-party people, $64,000. So it was tough. It was tough. And that was for the first 2 surgeries that I had. I had one more later on in the year because I did not learn my lesson of resting. And God was like, you will learn this. So, because he loves me, it's good. But anyway, so from these first 2 surgeries, I had a $64,000 bill. Hospital gave me $32,000. They made it $32,000 as a self-paid discount, which I'm grateful for. I was like, that's good. So anyway, you know, I'm chugging away, slowly paying this off. I'd been sick for 6 months or so I didn't work at all. And I finally had another closing, because in real estate, you only get paid when you close something. And so for 6 months, I took off, and thank the Lord, I had some savings, I was okay. But I finally get this closing, and I actively say to God, Lord, I know that I made you this promise. I need this right now. I have so many bills coming in every way. I will pay you this tithe during the next closing, when I'm a little bit more stable, a little bit more on my feet, right? That didn't go well. So that didn't go well. Long story short, I didn't have another closing for a long time. And so I ended up taking out a personal loan, and debt was my Nineveh. I was like, keep me away from debt as far as I can. I ended up taking a personal loan to bring down this debt. And then, and this is crazy, this is against my own wisdom. Talk about doing not what is right in my own eyes. I take a part of this personal loan to pay that tithe that I should have paid in the first place, because I felt the Lord was like, Betsy, you know what we talked about. And I was like, yeah, no, you did say that. And I did say that, actually. I told you first that I would do that. So I'm going to pay my bills every month. And all of a sudden I'm calling, and I call to pay this bill. And the guy at the hospital, this $32,000 bill, says, oh, this account says no balance. And I said, what? What are you talking about? And he said, oh, no, it says $0 balance. You can't pay anything, actually. And then I was like, well, check this account and this account. You know, there were 3 accounts attached to it. And he was like, nope, all of them are $0 balance. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, let me do some digging. He's like, there's a letter in every single one of these accounts that says that there's nothing left to owe. And I said, who did this? What happened? And he said, I don't know, it says a creditor. And I said, the hospital? And he said, no. And I said, a debt collector? And he said, no. And he said, no, a creditor. Somebody came and paid it, but it's anonymous, so I can't tell you who. And then, so here I am, right? Suddenly, $32,000 of weight off of my body, right? And instantly, I think of in Malachi, where God talks about tithing and how he tells Israel, you're robbing me because you're not tithing. And then he says, do you not know that I would open up the storehouses of heaven for you if you would only trust me in this? He says, test me in this only. The only thing the Bible actually says to test God in is tithing, which is really interesting. All that to be said, paying a tithe with a personal loan felt like a crazy thing to do to me. It was against my own wisdom. And what the Lord can do when we go against our own wisdom is actually incredibly profound. Flash forward, I got sick again, and I had another $25,000 bill from the hospital. The difference in me opening up the first bill and me opening up the second bill. When I opened up the first bill, I panic, total panic, right? When I open up the second bill, I literally lifted it up to God and I said, Lord, you have a bill, my friend. And I put it back down. And it was also paid before I ever paid a dime on it. So I'm just saying, guys, being in this wilderness season is not fun. It's incredibly uncomfortable. But the Lord, part of God bringing manna and quail is to show you that his resources are so much greater and bigger than you could ever bring for yourself. And part of us getting back to this garden mindset is to know that the Lord is actually capable of moving the things that he created himself, right? Because part of where we get mixed up in the fall is that because we were told to reign over creation, we start thinking that it's fully our responsibility, right? We are co-creators. We are not the creator. And the creator is the one who has every resource. Guys, the Israelites are in a desert, and God rains down dew that becomes bread on the ground. He brings quail every evening. He brings shade in the desert. He brings these resources. Israel doesn't. And also, even in the midst of that, I think that God is compassionate about our grumbling in the desert. I think he's compassionate. The scriptures literally say, because the Lord heard you grumbling, he showed up. Now here's the antidote. This is the thing that we can do if we want to, first off, learn how to be in the desert well. We need to do what God tells the Israelites to do in the desert, and that is to Sabbath. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till morning." Right? He's telling them this bread is going to be left over. Usually it melts away. He's saying it's going to be there. So they laid it aside till morning as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. And Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in a field. 6 days you shall gather, but on the 7th day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none." Sabbath is a gift in the wilderness. If you are feeling run down, if you are feeling drained, the Lord calls you to Sabbath and actually commands it. We'll talk about that too. On the 7th day, some of the people went out. This is the human experience though, right? On the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. How often do we do that, right? Whenever we're lacking resources, whenever we're feeling stuck, we're like, I just got to keep going. I just got to keep going. I got to work for myself. I got to keep going. And that's always what we do. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. The Lord has given you the Sabbath. This is a blessing. Therefore, on the 6th day, he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the 7th day. And so the people rested on the 7th day. For the first time in 2,500 to 3,000 years, the people of Israel finally got to rest on the 7th day. Now you'll notice there are a couple of things. You'll notice on the next page in your guys' booklets that I just printed the 10 commandments, and we're not going to go through all of them, but I just want to give you guys an idea, something to notice about the 10 commandments. When God gives us the commandments, he reminds us who we were first enslaved to, right? And for us as modern people, obviously we're not physically enslaved, but we're enslaved to our phones, we're enslaved to our email, we're enslaved to text messages, we're enslaved to rush hour. We're enslaved to so many things in our lives that the Lord is calling us to no longer be enslaved to the created thing, right? But instead, I guess, be a slave or a servant of the Creator, because enslavement doesn't want your good. You know how phones are made to literally keep you addicted? God doesn't want you addicted. God wants you coming willingly. God wants you coming out of love. And so anyway, notice these 2 things. If you just take a cursory glance at the 10 commandments, there are 2 that are rather lengthy. So listen to this. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth below, or that is in the water or under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. So in the garden, see, this is my board problem. So in Genesis 3, Eve bowed down to the serpent, right? This command, this lengthy command, is literally saying, don't bow down to a created thing. You are not made to bow down to a created thing. And then, the next lengthy one, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or your sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So now you're like, okay, great, Sabbath, I get it. Here's the thing. We need to understand how to do the Sabbath. I think oftentimes we don't know how to do it and why we do it. So the antidote to the wilderness is the Sabbath. And the thing about the Sabbath that I can't say is the Sabbath may not bring you out of the wilderness sooner. I can't say that it will do that. In fact, I think oftentimes when the Lord has us in a wilderness, it's on purpose. It's for spiritual formation, testing, solitude, or revelation. There are things I learned in this last year that I could not have possibly learned about the Lord if I had kept going my own way. And so the Lord commands us to Sabbath so that we can free ourselves from all of these other things. Does that make sense? I can't tell you that the Sabbath will take you out of the wilderness sooner, but what I can say to you is that I do believe that you'll see God more often in the wilderness if you do Sabbath. And I think that Sabbath seems a bit out of reach for some people, and these are just a couple of thoughts I would say. What does it even mean to Sabbath? I would say resting and worshiping. Those are two things. There's this book on the back of your guys' pamphlets. There's a book by a woman named Marva, and she actually says, ceasing, resting, embracing, and feasting are the things you do on Sabbath. I gave you guys a bunch of resources on the back of that for great books on the Sabbath and how to practice it. But I'd say this is why it's important. God, in the middle of the wilderness, has given you a way to remember who you are, to remember that you are not the creator, and that you are not supposed to worship a created thing. So the number one thing I do on my Sabbath now is I put away my phone. You got to get away from it, guys. It's the thing that will keep drilling, right? So I put away my phone, and if a whole day isn't possible for you right now, start with 2 hours, start with 3 hours, start with a small amount of time that you can focus on the Lord, right? That you can get away from the created things, the man-made things, and instead look at the Creator. One thing I've started doing whenever I feel anxious, these are like little mini Sabbaths in my life now. Whenever I feel anxious or overwhelmed, I have started going outside because Jesus says, ponder the birds. And so I've started bird watching, like not going out into the woods, but when I feel anxious, I go out onto my front porch and I wait until I see a bird and I just watch it for a few minutes. And you'd be surprised at how helpful that is actually. I think the last thing that I'll say is that there's this great book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. There's this line in it that says, if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you hurry. Because if you're in a hurry, it's very difficult to see God. And so part of the Sabbath is to slow down. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy to slow down, but God has actually given it to us as a gift. And, I've been thinking a lot about why is it every 7 days? And I think it's because it takes us about 7 days to forget who God is. Look at Israel, right? They're 3 days in the wilderness. They've just left enslavement. And they're like, oh, God, where are you? That's how we are. That's who we are as people. And so, yeah, friends, if you look on the back of that pamphlet, look at all of the Sabbath books I have on there. One of the things John Mark Comer says is the Sabbath is coming for you, and it will either be through delight or discipline. And so for me, it was discipline. I pray that you guys choose delight because it's way better that way. That's what I have for you guys today. Sorry, it was a little lengthy. My first time doing it this way. So I appreciate you guys. And I'm going to pray us out. So I forgot to pray at the beginning. Sorry, guys. Lord Jesus, I am so grateful for this opportunity to speak and for these ladies who showed up here, Lord. I pray that we would see the Creator. I pray that we would know that we are created things and that we're not made to worship created things. God, I pray that if we are in a wilderness, Lord, that we would find places to Sabbath, that we'd find places to stop and to cease and to feast, and to rest, Lord Jesus. I pray that we would know that you are the greatest resource that we can have, and that you can open up the storehouses of heaven for us, Lord, so that we can find a childlike faith that we probably don't even remember is possible at this point, Lord. So I pray that you'd make us all children again, that we'd be able to trust and rest knowing that we have a Father who has the storehouses of heaven for us. We love you, Lord, and we're so grateful for who you are and for what you've done, and we praise you for the Sabbath, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.